A really great and varied perspective from a federal perspective down to a local perspective, and then even down to just a concerned and engaged civic individual on how we can help to shape and change our urban ecosystems. And so just to frame the conversation, I want to just draw us back to what it is that we're talking about, and that's in our guidebook. But I want to read, it says, by the end of the century, almost 9 billion people are projected to live in cities, representing 85% of the world's population. Historically, urbanization has been associated with a higher quality of life as opposed to rural communities. However, a number of ills can be traced to widespread urbanization, including concentrated poverty, environmental concerns, and reduced economic opportunity. This affects new cities in developing worlds as well as post-industrial localities and presents both risks and opportunities. And so, how can policymakers make decisions today that will lead to more resilient and inclusive cities in the long run? And so today, our discussion will include myself. My name is Tameka Montgomery. I'm the Associate Administrator for the Office of Entrepreneurial Development at the U.S. Small Business Administration. To my right here, we have Cesar Mitchell, who is the President of the Atlanta City Council. To my left, we have Sameera Fazili, who is the Community and Economic Development Advisor at the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. And then we have Tishaura Jones, Treasurer of the St. Louis City and County.
No, just city.
Just the city.
There's
City
a
of St.
difference.
Louis.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then at the end, we have Michael Tomkins, who is the founder of a nonprofit organization in St. Louis called START. And so to begin our conversation, I'm going to ask Sameera to just share with us from a demographic and economic shift that's happening in our nation here that's really affecting and should inform how we deal with urban kind of ecosystems. Sameera?
All right, thank you for that, Tameka. Before I begin, I just wanted to say that the comments that I present today do not necessarily reflect those of the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta or the Federal Reserve System. So this is just me speaking up here for the most part. But I wanted to help set the frame of the economic backdrop that cities, or more precisely metros, are facing, and the national economic growth story right here in the U.S., because our picture is still a bit mixed this far after the Great Recession. Unemployment, I may be saying stuff a lot of you already know, but unemployment is lower than from the peak of the Great Recession, but so is labor force participation rate. While retirement of the baby boomers had always predicted that at this time we would see a lower labor force participation rate, so fewer working age people in the labor force, the drops that we've seen in recent years cannot be explained just by the retirement of the baby boomers. Another trend is that we've added back all the jobs that were lost since the Great Recession, but the mix of jobs isn't the same anymore. We did not add back all the middle-skilled jobs that were lost. So places that have seen job growth saw increases in lower wage jobs, lower skilled jobs, and higher wage, higher skilled jobs. But those middle skilled jobs are traditionally the ones people think about as the core of the middle class, because oftentimes they don't require a 4-year degree, so there are lower barriers to entry, and they offer decent wages and benefits. So on top of that mix of jobs that are available, wages have been stagnant or declining for lower skilled and middle skilled workers, and that's over a 30-year time horizon actually. And incomes are only really growing for the upper half of the job distribution. So with the exception of the unemployment rate, these trends I'm talking about largely predate the Great Recession. So for a long time now, our national economy has been changing, and a lot of economists will say it's driven by both globalization and technological change. We heard a lot of about technology in the main panel, in the main sessions there. And we see that the services sector is increasingly providing more and more jobs, but the jury is still out on what the quality of jobs coming out of the services sector will be, and can they be the same engine for a middle-class lifestyle that things like construction or manufacturing were able to do. On top of those economic trends, we have demographic shifts occurring in this country. When you look at the age distribution broken out by race and ethnicity, you see that Generation X, the millennials, and those under 15 are majority non-white in this country now, which means our workforce is becoming increasingly diverse. But when you couple those demographic trends with the current racial disparities in educational attainment, it suggests that we aren't doing enough to create the skilled workforce we need to drive our economy in the future. Because remember, I said the jobs that are growing are really the higher skilled jobs that require some advanced educational, advanced training. But I lay that picture out before we start this panel about metros, because metros are sort of the ground zero for generating economic growth. The economic growth is, neighborhood level, metro level, national level, regional level. It all adds up together. And the challenge of creating an environment that supports economic growth but also finds ways to make that growth more broadly shared is a challenge that I think metropolitan regions are taking on more and more these days, and that's exactly how our system here in the US has always been designed. Great. It is designed to be a laboratory of the states where the national government learns from the successes and failures of state and local policymakers. So I'm excited that we have such a great mix of folks here, because at the end of the day, the roadmap for overcoming these current economic challenges is going to come from local innovators, whether they're social entrepreneurs, business leaders, policymakers, nonprofit leaders, and it'll be them collaborating amongst themselves, between themselves, to come up with new ideas, work together to test them, and measure their results. So
great, thank you, Sameera. And so, Cesar, she talked about the impact from a local perspective and the things that need to happen locally. And I like how you said, from a federal perspective, we're not driving it. We learn from what's happening on a local level to make changes. So can you just share with us here in Atlanta what it is that you all are working on to really ensure it's inclusive, that this ecosystem that you all have here is benefiting kind of that changing demographic?
Absolutely. First and foremost, Tameka, I think this is really great to have this kind of discussion, number one. Number two, I'm very impressed to see here in this room a very diverse collection of people. And I think that's indicative of how we are changing as a society, and certainly how we are evolving as a community here. Cities really are where the rubber hits the road. That's where your tax dollars are spent. That's where your day-to-day services that really provide you with quality of life are delivered. I think the title of this panel discussion, kind of reimagining the urban ecosystem, I think is very appropriate, because sometimes we forget in local government or in government or just really in community when you talk about government, business, and even the philanthropic and civic sector, is that communities really are ecosystems. And one thing that's very important to note about an ecosystem is that an ecosystem is cyclical. What that means, being cyclical, if I'm saying that word right, it goes around and around in circles. It has its ups and downs, and it has its ups and downs. So while you're up at one point, you're going to be down at some point. And the real challenge is being prepared not only for the tough times, but also being prepared. Garen, I don't know, am I doing something wrong with my mic? You're working on it? Can you all hear me? Yes. If I'm talking too low, just raise your hand and I'll speak a little louder. But we not only have to be prepared for the good times, and that is taking advantage of the opportunities of the good times, we also have to be prepared for the tough times when we're down. And I think some of the challenges we face, for example, in Atlanta has a very diverse economic ecosystem. And people say, well, what is Atlanta known for? And I tell people sometimes, Atlanta really isn't known for anything as it relates to industry, because we have a lot of things that we do well. And if you come to Atlanta, there's something for you there regardless of your background or your skill. And I think that's part of our strength. But one of the things I think we do struggle with, as do many cities, is being really poorly prepared for the downturn. And also not really remembering the bad times when the good times come. And I'll get to that a little bit later in my comments. The second thing I think we're facing right now in our cities, and this was just touched on earlier, is income inequality. And really what happens with respect to income inequality and the collateral result of lack of access to capital and lack of access to quality jobs. Those are issues that every community faces, and certainly we face those issues here in Atlanta. And then, when you think about it on a very basic level, our community, like many other communities, we face blight. And what does blight mean? That means you're walking down or riding down the street and you see a house that is dilapidated, you see lots that are overgrown. Well, that has a significant impact on a community's ecosystem from an economic standpoint, from a psychological standpoint, as well as from an educational standpoint. And then, closely associated with blight are public health issues that we have to grapple with. And what do I mean when I say public health issues? I'm talking about HIV. I'm talking about issues related to chronic diseases, whether it's asthma, hypertension, and all those things that increase healthcare costs and reduce citizen productivity. We also, and this is my opinion, crime is a public health concern. And until we really grapple with crime in our communities from that perspective, we will continue to suffer from that particular chronic disease. And so when you look at a community, and when you look at the ecosystem of a community, you've got to think about all of these things. Well, in Atlanta, one of the things that we really pride ourselves in is being able to kind of string together a coalition of people across sectors to get the business of the day done. Government opens up its doors to business. Business stays very connected to the community through philanthropic work, and we look for ways to create partnerships. As we kind of have emerged from the recession, and as was noted earlier, there's still things that are problematic. If you had a job before the recession, and lost that job, the job you have now may not be the same type of job that is fulfilling and certainly paying the same kinds of wages and providing the same level of career opportunity that you may have had before the recession. In our city, we really focused in on economic development from a community development standpoint, whereas we really made a public investment through tax increment financing in reimagining, repositioning our communities and helping to not only eliminate blight, but create opportunity through real estate development. What that sparked was gentrification. And so when the recession came, we literally saw gentrification slow down, but then the recession ended. And we'd been having a number of conversations before the recession around affordable housing. But when the recession came, those conversations ended like all other real estate activity. But now that the market is hot and we've got a lot of real estate activity going on, our conversation regarding affordable housing has lagged. And I think it's created a significant threat. So we've got to put in place the infrastructure to have that kind of conversation. But that's just one of many issues that we're working on in Atlanta, and we'll discuss it more as I see I have limited time.
Yeah, we'll have each of our panelists kind of just give a general frame, and then we'll have a conversation and open it up to you all to ask your questions. And so Tishaura, please share with us what you're doing and leading.
Great, thank you for having me on this panel. I'm honored to be here. So in St. Louis, the treasurer of the city of St. Louis is an elected position, and I'm probably one of the most unique elected officials you'll ever meet. Not only am I responsible for investments and cash management and typical things a treasurer does, I'm also the parking supervisor. So all the parking tickets, I know that Atlanta has some problems right now with parking. Caesar, we should talk. So all of that is under my purview. I have over 10,000 metered spaces, 6 garages and 2 surface lots, in addition to parking tickets and setting parking policy for the city. So that takes about 80% of my time and effort, and the other part is the 20%. But it puts me also in a unique position because I control that pot of money. And in the wrong hands, that could be used for evil. And I've decided to use my power for good. And so this year, I've decided to take a portion of our net income and put it towards investing in families and investing in children in financial literacy.
That's great.
We just opened thank you. We just opened an Office of Financial Empowerment in City Hall. It's one of the first Hope Insides in a municipal seat. And we did that in partnership with 5 banks that funded the salary and benefits of the employee, the Hope Inside employee, for the next 3 years. And I'm proud to say that one of those banks is here today, Mike Walsh from Eagle Bank, if you could stand. I'm going to embarrass Mike a little bit because he actually came to me with this idea, and then we came down to Atlanta with his staff, toured Ebenezer, and we're really just energized about the work that goes on in Hope Inside and Ebenezer. And so we opened in City Hall in August of last year. But the other banks that came to the table, he helped me bring other banks to the table: BMO Harris, Midwest Bank Center, Scottrade, and Wells Fargo. And rarely do you see a banker bringing other banks to the table to say, hey, let's collaborate and work together. They're usually competing against each other for customers. And what that commitment, it's not only a commitment of money, but each bank commits to come into the center every week, or at least once a week, to meet with people, to have banking hours in City Hall. That doesn't happen as well. And so we've had a great demand just from having that center there available for not only for employees, but for anybody who wants to change their financial futures. We had our first class in December. We budgeted maybe 15 people would come. We had 21 people. Our next class is this Saturday. We have a waiting list and had to push people to February. So people are hungry for this information. And the other things we do there, we have an Employee Financial Empowerment Lunch and Learn series. We're doing another series targeted towards young professionals. We titled it Beer Money. By the time we announced it, it filled up in the first 12 hours because young professionals, I don't know if they want to come for the free beer or for the class, but you have to bring them in somehow, right? You have to meet people where they are. 2 summers in a row, we've been working with the Summer Youth Employment Program. We give every teenager who is in our Summer Youth Employment Program a free checking account and savings account, and make them take a savings pledge to save part of their paycheck. Now, what do you think that they're saving for? Just any ideas?
Shoes.
All of y'all are wrong.
Technology.
The kids said they were saving for their education.
Oh, that's good.
We had one kid save $1,200 in the first summer.
Oh, that's great.
So kids are also hungry for this information as well. And to date, we've had, of the 1,200 or 1,300 kids that we've had in the program, they've saved over $70,000 of their own money.
That's
So
good.
thank you. But we do this also through partnerships. We realize that we can't do this on our own. So we are always out there talking to different banks and credit unions to see how can we help them get more customers, and then also how can we help deliver that message of financial literacy. Because what does John Hope Bryant said? Nothing changes your life more than the love of God or a 120-point rise in your credit score. Are we right?
Yeah.
So our most ambitious program to date has been the launch of the College Kids Children's Savings Account program. So again, we took residual parking revenue and we invested it in kids. This fall, 2,816 kindergartners received an account open in their name with $50 loaded in it from the parking division.
That's great.
So that's what you can do with the parking money.
I love it.
That's great.
And then we're raising money privately for incentives and matches and bonuses. So that this year they get $1 per week bonus for perfect attendance. They get $1 per dollar match up to the first $100 saved. And parents get up to can earn up to $50 for participation in financial education courses, either in person, online, or via our phone app. So again, we are meeting people where they are. Parents may not have a PC at home. They may have access to a PC at work, or penetration of smartphones in the minority community is upwards of 70 to 80%. So that mom or dad that's sitting on the bus or sitting on the train on their way to work can take a quick financial education course and get credit in their children's account. I think it's a $5 credit they can get for each class they take via the app. So we're trying to meet people where they are.
Great.
And our partner in this is First Financial Federal Credit Union. And they participate in a co-op, a citywide co-op, which gives us a regional footprint. They can go to any credit union and deposit money in their account, and it gets matched dollar for dollar. The cool part about that is this particular credit union has really been a great partner. They're doing a pizza night, a family savings night at the credit union at the end of this month. And for every kindergartner that shows up, they're going to give them $20 for that account. And of
Great.
course, that gets matched dollar for dollar, so they'll get $40.
Right.
And so every kid that shows up will have $90 in their account. How cool is that?
That's very cool.
But we've been raising money privately with companies and using our philanthropic reach, because this is a program that everybody can put their arms around. Who's going to say no to investing in children? And just the mere presence of an account, less than $500. Research from Washington University shows that if a child with an account less than $500 is 3 times more likely to go to college and 4 times more likely to complete college. It changes their mind. It changes their trajectory. They think that I have an account. I have a college savings account, so I am going to college. So we are committed to investing in every kindergartner in a public school in the city of St. Louis for many years to come.
Great.
And we did it all with parking revenue.
Great. Thank you, Tishaura. Thank you so much for that. And then Michael has a unique perspective in the way that he's engaged not as an employee or a government official, but rather an individual resident. So Michael, can you just share what you're doing?
Sure, thank you. And again, I too am honored to be here and have this discussion with all of you today, and really honored to be on stage with someone as wonderful as Tishaura, who is in my hometown of St. Louis and doing really great work. And so when I moved to St. Louis 2 years ago, it was because of a job transition, and I could have I've been blessed and could have chosen anywhere in the world actually to live, and I chose St. Louis. And for us, if you could just put the slide up, that would help me. For us, it was a place that had really good people, that had an amazing set of professional sports teams, which was important to us. Wonderful.
We have one less now.
Yeah, one less now. Wonderful art and museums, and it was just a place that resonated with us for the architecture. And so we bought 2 years ago in a transitional neighborhood and renovated our home, which at the time we had bought in foreclosure. And shortly thereafter, the Michael Brown incident happened. And I can tell you that I have never seen more blatant racism anywhere than in St. Louis, and I had not been affected by that ever in my entire life, either as a child or as an adult. And because of that, I started to notice things around my new hometown with fresh eyes, because fresh eyes were a little bit different than what people had seen over 50 years of racism. And so I live it in my community. It's my neighborhood, and this is what most of the houses look like in my neighborhood. And while some people might not think it's so bad, I happen to think it's one of the most beautiful communities because people do come together. They came together to do some street art that was on the streets of Grand Avenue, which is the street that I lived just off of shortly after those events. And what I had hoped for was that there would be a conversation that opened from it. And unfortunately, no conversation, in my opinion, as a resident there, has ever really come to fruition. And you know, as Caesar said earlier, I think everything starts with a conversation. And so what I started to do was go around my city and in particular my neighborhood, and look at what were the things that were out there that people were saying. And I found the silenced in messages in street art. So much so that they really affected me, and so I started to look into the historical issues around St. Louis as it resulted from race, and came up with an urban city project that had failed called Pruitt-Igoe. I won't get into that. There's a wonderful documentary on it that explains the history of it that you can sort of get up to speed rather quickly. But at the time that Pruitt-Igoe was failing, and the failure of the community of St. Louis to support the underprivileged in that area, they too tried to heal it with art. And so they paid artists to come in to paint people, black people in particular, in happy times in the Pruitt-Igoe neighborhood. I met with a reporter from NPR who lived in that building, who gave me one of these paintings, which is now 50 years old. That was very moving and very touching, and this is actually a large painting. And then after I started to look into, well, how could we start a conversation, I was blessed to drive down to the Mississippi River flood wall. And having an interest in art, and that being the reason that I moved to St. Louis, when I went down to the wall, I saw what was perhaps the most amazing and profound art I had ever seen. And they're substantial and beautiful. And so this is me in front of one of the pieces. They're all about this large. And I thought, well, you know, if people can come down here and paint on a wall and be spectacular artists, then why can't we pair that with the messages that I'm reading in graffiti in my neighborhood every day and create something of voice, the start of a conversation, and perhaps some hope to finally open up and get people talking. I know that from conversing with people, the black community is done with it. It's been 50 years, nothing's been done, nothing's really moved forward, and any of the white community that I've talked to about it ignore it. And so I thought that art is a really wonderful place to bridge that divide. I mean, this piece is about 30 foot tall, just amazing in terms of the graphic design of it. And if we can pair this with messaging, it would be another step. And so what I've done is I've worked with Washington University and a nonprofit organization called Anthropedia to start a street art project in St. Louis. We're going to take 15 street artists on large canvases, 9 by 12, and have them paint in black and white the feelings of the underprivileged community in street art on those canvases, because the truth is black and white.
Great.
And then the very next day, take those same artists in a beautiful part of our city and paint in color, because color is hope, and have them paint their version of our new community. And my hope is that then we can take that on a tour to other cities around America to start opening up a conversation, the proceeds of which will fund programs through Anthropedia and Washington University, which has a track record around coaching models for students and children, as well as adults in the underprivileged areas. And in addition to that, also provide coaching models for engaging the police departments on our street. So
Great.
Thank you for having me here.
Thank you. So as I shared when I opened up, I work for SBA in the Office of Entrepreneurial Development, and I think that as we talk about how do we affect and change urban economic ecosystems, I think entrepreneurship, you talked about partnering with business and small business, is so important. I know our president believes that entrepreneurship and small businesses really are the engine of our economy. And so what I have the pleasure of doing and the work that I do is nationally providing support to organizations that have that one-on-one touch with the entrepreneurs. Because at the end of the day, when we look at underserved communities, there are key things that they recognize, or that we've found that they often lack, and that we know about access to capital. I mean, you mentioned that, Caesar, and we know that women and people of color, their ability to access capital is diminished significantly. And so, Tishaura, I think the work that you're doing with Hope Inside right helps to open up relationships and access to opportunity. And so at SBA, one of the things that we do is work, obviously partner with banks and credit unions to open up and to incent those banks to provide funding to small business owners. The other piece of it that is so important is the access to the information. You know, one of the things that and that's what I get to work on. You know, everybody always talks about access to capital, but what I like to say is that access to information is just as important, if not more important, because if you don't know how to effectively use those dollars in your business, in the long run, it's not going to benefit you. And so what we are doing through my office is we have really taken a focus looking at where are the greatest needs. And one of the things that we know is that with our changing demographic, we know that the millennials are 86 million strong. As Sameera said, they are really the largest age cohort since the baby boomers, and they're most diverse. However, we often call them the most entrepreneurial generation, but in fact, they are starting businesses at a far less rate than previous generations. Secondly, women, we know that women are increasing in the number of businesses. Women are opening up businesses 4 times the rate of men. And so now we have about 9.9 million women-owned small businesses, which is a 27.5% increase over 2005, which is great. And then if we look at women of color in particular, women of color are actually starting businesses at a far faster rate than even their male counterparts. And then in that group, African American women and Latino women are starting businesses at an even faster rate. African American women, 67.5% increase or growth, and Latina at 87.3%. But the interesting contrast to that is that while we are seeing more people of color starting businesses, their businesses tend to be small, very small. You know, it's about, when we look at the average gross receipts of a minority-owned business, of all the groups, it's $195,000 as compared to whites, which is $649,000, with African American businesses being the lowest at just $72,000. Then if you break it down to women and African American women, back in 2007, the average annual gross receipts of a black, of African American woman-owned business was about $43,000. 2012, the numbers was about $20,000. So there is work to be done, because when we think about opportunity, job creation, and income generation, filling the wealth gap, entrepreneurship has long been that tool. But if we can't help these businesses scale up and grow, having more in number is great, but we really need to help them figure out how do they grow. And so what we're doing is we have funded an initiative called Scale Up America. And we are now in 15 communities throughout the United States. And what Scale Up America is about is really focusing on underrepresented groups that are at a certain income level, and then providing them with intensive key supports that really helps them scale up their business, giving them access to key networks, access to growth capital, intensive one-on-one business assistance, and an intensive training. And so those are the things that we're working on. Currently, SBA, we're looking at how do we help people who have been formerly incarcerated. Just in July, SBA passed a rule that now allows individuals who are on probation and parole to be able to get a microloan, a loan of $50,000 and below. And so now, yes, that's great, but we want, as I said, the access to the information. Now we want to make sure that they understand really how to start and grow a small business. So those are just a couple of things that I have the great pleasure to work on and do out of my space. And so now we want to just have a conversation, whether it's from a panelist, if you have questions, or in the audience.
Well, I think it's good I certainly, with the collection of folks here, I think it would be good to just hear from the audience. But I wanted just to add to what Tameka said about the power of what SBA is doing. In Atlanta, I do something, I've done this for the last 5 years, called Back to Business. And SBA and GSA have been an incredible partner, and we provided an opportunity for hundreds of businesses, small, women-owned, veteran-owned, minority businesses, to beyond having access to information, to have access to relationships. And that's so important for a small business, for a women-owned business, for a veteran who's just coming back and wanting to start business. And the reason it's so important is because if we get real about it, when you think about the space in which small businesses and minority businesses and women-owned businesses actually operate and are able to thrive, it's really in the government space. But something has happened really unique with our Back to Business program. We started off primarily in partnership with SBA and GSA, focused on connecting small business owners with opportunities in government at both the local, state, and federal level. And now it's evolved into a program where we literally are having tens of businesses, corporations come in saying, we want to meet small businesses, minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses to create real B2B relationships. But we would not have been able to do that if we didn't have the support of SBA here on the ground, here locally. So I just wanted to add that plug.
Thank you. Any other panels did you want to add, or do you have questions out in the audience that you would like to ask of our?
Just a moment.
Oh, there's the mic. Okay, we have a roaming mic. Yes, sir.
So you talked about how the businesses that we do start, they tend to be very small.
Yes.
Have you all been able to identify the reasons why? And also, have you all been able to kind of get more granular with the data to say, well, this industry is taking off, but for some reason we're still starting businesses in this industry for whatever reason, and we didn't get access to the information, and so that's an industry that's kind of in recession. Just want you to speak to that.
Yeah,
what are
we
the
do
reasons?
find that there are certain sectors that people of color, women, African Americans tend to lean toward. Oftentimes it's the social service industries. And so the revenue generation in those spaces are a lot lower than, let's say, the technology space. And so we announced an initiative called Innovate Her, where we were really trying to encourage women who create products that improve and impact the lives of women. And we are, and so as a way to kind of raise awareness around, moving women into new sectors and new spaces. So that's part of the reason why. And then the other is, the factors into why our businesses oftentimes we have less capital to even start with. That's number one. Secondly, many times we don't have a family member who has had a successful business. And so within our homes, we haven't grown up in conversations about business and assets and things of that sort. So that also has an impact. And then you talked about making sure people have access to networks. That's the other thing is in terms of growing a business, business is about relationships. And if your network is limited and even their resources, it's hard. It makes it harder to grow. So those are just some of the factors that we've been able to see.
Good morning. My question is for Cesar. You touched on two important things I felt, which were gentrification and then the market here in Atlanta. So as a millennial and also a transplant to the city, when you think about the growth and the influx coming into the city, and you also think about those, a good example right now is Peoplestown. For those individuals in certain communities who are being pushed out, you see lots of growth in building apartments and businesses. But when you look at the number of people who originally have resided in those communities, what are the solutions when it comes to just, again, the influx of those professionals? We tend to push others out who may not necessarily have the background or the means. Another point was this morning from the speaker, we have particular positions related to technology and education. So for those of us who may not have that background, what is the solution for gentrification?
Well, first and foremost, I think government has a very important role to play in addressing gentrification. Gentrification is something that really in large part is driven by the market. But what government has to really, and I'm really concerned, if I'm honest, I'm concerned that we are behind the 8 ball on this issue of affordable housing. And being able to stay in a community where you have lived for many, many years, because we've gotten, as I said earlier, back into a position where our economy is strong. From a real estate development standpoint, Atlanta really is known as a real estate town, real estate development town. But the conversation around creating real affordable housing policy has not really kept up with the recovery. And so there's a tremendous conversation going on now to move us towards strong affordable housing policy. We are also doing a zoning rewrite in our city right now. And the reason I bring that up is because I think we're at a point now where our affordable housing policy is going to now have to be more drastic than it would have had to have been if we had just kind of kept up with the pace of the recovery. And so you will see a serious conversation in our city around inclusionary zoning citywide. And that's something that will generate a visceral reaction from the development community, but I think the development community understands how important it is, and I think you'll see some positive traction there. When it comes to making sure that people can stay in their homes, as it relates to having been in a community for many, many years, and not having rising taxes and rising costs of living drive them out. That again is where government has to really get engaged. But on the city level, we've got to be engaged not just on from a local policy standpoint, but we've got to engage our state legislators around tax policies that are controlled and established by the state. Just yesterday, we had a legislative luncheon with our Atlanta delegation of legislators. As a session here in Georgia has just started, the state legislative session, and that was one of the issues we discussed kind of informally. What can we do around taxing policy to ensure that we don't tax people out of their homes?
No, Tishaura,
I wanted to address that as well, because we see that in St. Louis as well. And just to give you an example, out of 160 recent TIF projects, only 3 were in low income or minority neighborhoods. And so there's been a discussion, and again, this doesn't even fall under my purview, but these are things I care about. There's been a discussion in how do we effectively give out tax increment financing that is responsible and make sure that all of the development doesn't happen. What we say in St. Louis, South dividing line. If I don't know if you've seen the BBC documentary about Delmar Boulevard in St. Louis, all of the economic development happens south of Delmar, and I happen to live north of Delmar. So as we look at our TIF policy, we should be restructuring that if we're going to give you tax increment financing to build in St. Louis, you need to be able to also push some of those dollars in underserved areas.
And certainly as a part of the TIF financing, and we did this in Atlanta, of the city's 10 tax allocation districts, I was actually the creator of 4 of them. And these were the last 4 created, and they were created in communities where they should have been created first. And that was a conversation that we had, but one of the things that we did, and I'm not sure how many of you all are familiar with the Beltline project. It is a tax increment financing driven project, but one of the policy pieces that we put in this particular project, as well as the 4 tax allocation districts that we created in South and West Atlanta, was a requirement that you provide affordable housing if you're going to get this free tax money. And that there are other types of community benefits that you have to bring to bear.
Well, I just have been told that we have to wrap this up so that you all can be able to transition to your next session. So thank you all for your attention, and I wish we could have had more time to ask questions.